go over the syllabus. We'll probably be here quite a while tonight because I do want to start Lord of the Rings, even though we may not get into it much. Let me, before we begin, how many of you have read Lord of the Rings before? Hopefully some of you, not enough of you. Okay. How many of you have seen the films? Okay, forget about that trash. It's trash. Okay, I'll explain why in a moment. I'm Dr. Sherman. My office is across the hallway, not right at that wall, but take a right, take a left in the first office block, take a left, take a right, take a right. It's off in the back, Peck Hall 352. Email address is ted.sherman@mtsu.edu. If you need to email me for anything, you're going to be, late with a paper, you're going to ask for an extension, you're not going to make it to class because your dog died or your child died or, storm or slow or sleet or rain or whatever, use this email address. Don't use the D2L. Come on in.
Sorry, I went to the wrong transfer.
That's okay. Don't use the D2L one. This is the one I check regularly. I check the D2L one, but not as regularly. Okay? And I've had several instances in the last couple of years of students sending emails via D2L and they disappear. I never received them, and they can show me receipts that they actually sent them, but they don't arrive. So use the Ted Sherman at mtsu.edu. Name?
Sarah Walton.
Yeah, you're on. Right there. Office hours 5 to 6 p.m. Monday and Tuesday night because I have class at 6 o'clock Monday and Tuesday night, and 8:30, 9:30 Tuesday, Thursday morning, and by appointment. You'll notice there's no phone number because I won't answer the phone. I get a lot of junk mail, people trying to sell me stocks or life insurance or burial plots, and I just have stopped answering the phone entirely. If I go in the morning and the little light's blinking, I'll check to see what the message is, and usually we'll just delete it. So that's that. Texts. I did not bring in the Harry Potter text because there's too many of them. But they're the Harry Potter novels. I don't care what versions you use. You can buy the actual dead tree versions. You can use Kindle version or other electronic versions. Doesn't matter to me. You can use the British editions, which I actually like a little bit better than the American editions. Doesn't matter. Similarly with Lord of the Rings. How many of you have read the Harry Potter novels? Okay, most of you. How many of you? I shouldn't ask. Because you're going to find out they're just as bad. This is the Lord of the Rings edition that I've ordered for the class simply because it's handy. It's a lot easier to carry one book than it is 3 of those that's sitting on your desk. But I don't have any problem if only about 4 or 5 of you raised your hand, so I don't think I have any diehard Lord of the Rings nerds in here. But if you are a diehard Lord of the Rings nerd, you might have an old dog-eared 3-volume separate book, okay, version of the Lord of the Rings. If you want to use that, that's fine. Okay. If you've got the 3 individual volumes, whether the classy one like that, the mass trade paperback, that's fine also. With both the Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings, however, if you don't use this version of the Lord of the Rings, and I don't specify in the syllabus which version to use, I did to the bookstore, it'll present one little difficulty for you, and that's following along. Okay? It is necessary to bring the book to class. Again, whether it's dead tree version or electronic version, you're going to want it in front of you because you're going to want to mark up passages to take notes. That'll be important when it comes to exam time. Okay? And we're going to talk about an awful lot of passages. Every one of these little sticky note type things in here. And there's a lot that aren't included. Everything pretty much after this one or this one, it's pretty much all appendices. We're not going to spend, double check before I open my mouth. We won't spend much time on the appendices. I might make a couple of points about them. Okay? Lord of the Rings is one story. Okay? It's a novel. It's not a trilogy. A trilogy is 3 separate but linked stories. Okay? The Return of the King is the continuation of The Two Towers. You can't pick up The Return of the King, read it on its own, and really understand what the hell's going on. Similarly, you can't pick up The Two Towers and understand what's going on. You can't pick up The Fellowship of the Ring, just read it and say, I don't like this stuff. It's too boring. He uses big words and a lot of description, and it's archaic. And he's talking about, Middle Ages. He's not talking about the Middle Ages, by the way. We'll talk about that also. It's one story. The Harry Potter novels are 7 totally distinct novels. They're about the character Harry Potter. But you can pick up the 5th book and read it on its own without having read books 4, 3, 2, or 1. You'll get more out of it if you've read 4, 3, 2, or 1. Okay? But you can read each of those kind of on their own. Okay? There are a couple of additional things you need to read for this class, kind of background stuff. And I'm going to send you one that's also not on the syllabus. I'm going to send you a very brief essay. Let's try and write that in English. By a 19th century Scottish writer named George MacDonald. And the essay is just called The Fantastic Imagination. The syllabus originally had an essay by J.R.R. Tolkien called On Fairy Stories, which was an essay he wrote back in the mid-30s, delivered it in the late 30s. And the only reason I took it off is because the link that I've been using to it for, 10 years at least, is suddenly dead. The people that hosted this essay, it's no longer there. And I know of other places that I could link to, and I've got plenty of PDF versions of it. I could have emailed it to you. But I decided to try something a little different in this semester's versions of this course. I also teach this course Tuesday and Thursday mornings. So it doesn't quite sync well between what we do in the evening course and what I do in the morning courses, because I have 3 hours to bore you here, but only 85 minutes a day with the other 2. Okay, the background material, in addition to this, and I'll email this or post it on the D2L website probably tomorrow. Probably won't do it when I get home. In addition to that, you have a book by Boethius. I'm not going to give you his full name because it's really long, because he's an ancient Roman. 6th century writer, died in the 6th century. The book is called The Consolation of Philosophy. Okay? Boethius was a Roman, as I said, who was accused of conspiring to kill the emperor, with whom he was very good friends. Okay? The emperor at the time was a German named Theodoric. So Theodoric threw him in jail for a capital offense. He was death row, essentially. And he did die in prison. And Boethius was innocent, by the way. He wasn't plotting against the emperor. So while he's sitting there rotting in jail, he's wondering, why me? Why did this happen to me? And so he writes this book, The Consolation of Philosophy, which is essentially kind of designed to answer why bad things happen to good people. Or it deals with the problem of evil in the world. The Consolation of Philosophy, the title doesn't mean, pick up Aristotle and you'll suddenly feel better. It'll just make all you... It's not what he means. The Consolation of Philosophy, the title, refers to, in this story that he writes, this fiction that he writes, the character of the goddess Philosophy, love of wisdom, comes to him to teach him. Essentially, to teach him how to suck it up. Take your life, take the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Hamlet calls them, and deal with them. Okay? So the consolation is the consolation that she teaches him. Okay? In talking about how the world works. how the world works. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And I'll refer to when you need to have that read when we get to the schedule. The next thing is not a writing by an ancient Roman, but it's a writing by a 19th century German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche. And there's a couple of things there. Okay? I've got a link to a little bit of background about Nietzsche. Nietzsche is a pretty interesting character. But the first thing I'd like you to read is especially part 5 of Beyond Good and Evil. Just the title itself ought to tell you a little bit. Okay? And then the next thing is Thus Spake Zarathustra. Okay? A little bit of background about Nietzsche. Nietzsche, as I said, was a 19th century German philosopher, died in an insane asylum because he went insane. But he was the first person, not the first person to say or think this, but he was the first person to actually claim, to posit, to write, God is dead. Okay? And he said, God is dead, and with that come a whole bunch of repercussions. Because once God is dead, everything is permissible. Everything is permitted. That is, who's going to stop you from doing whatever you want? If there's no eternal damnation or blessing to achieve, to earn, then it's, c'est la vie. It's do whatever you want in this life. Okay? He also came up with the idea of the Übermensch. Übermensch. Über means over. Mensch means man. You're all familiar with this guy. We don't call him the Overman, however. We call him Superman. But not the Superman in the tights and the big S on his chest. That's a different kind of Superman. It's kind of loosely derived from Nietzsche. What do we mean by this in referring it to Nietzsche's idea? What Nietzsche meant was that there are people who should not be bound by the moral constraints and codes and mores of the society in which they live. There are people whose greatness so far outshines their society that they can do whatever they damn well please. Okay? So what does that lead to? Or what can that lead to? Anarchy. If you think you are so great that you don't have to listen to what your society says, that your ideas raise you above everybody else. God complex, as somebody said in my earlier class, a sociopath.
Sounds a lot like what Hitler was saying to the Nazis.
Bingo. Okay. Hitler's whole idea of the supermen of the Aryan race is based on Nietzsche. It's entirely based on Nietzsche. Okay? And you're going to see, when we get to Lord of the Rings, you're going to see elements of Boethian philosophy. And then when we get to Harry Potter, you're going to see elements of Nietzschean philosophy. Because there's a major character who is like the living embodiment of what Nietzsche was talking about. Another phrase that Nietzsche used, that's in the syllabus, is this idea of the will to power. The will, the volition to power, to seek power, to achieve power. See, Nietzsche hated Christianity because he thought Christianity was for losers. Christianity was for weaklings. Because after all, what does the founder of Christianity say? Someone smacks you upside the head, what do? Turn around and chop their head off, right? No. Turn the other cheek. Pray for your enemies. Do good to those who do evil to you. Nietzsche said, Patsy, wuss. That is not the way to achieve what you want in this life. Nietzsche believed the whole idea of, you only go around once. Going to use an old beer commercial. So, everybody know the rest of the commercial? Go for the gusto. Get what you can. You've seen the bumper sticker. He who dies with the most toys wins. Bill Gates is pretty much, at the top of the world then. Okay? So we'll talk about those ideologies, okay, in relation to the two works. Course description. The specific theme of the course is the renunciation of power in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and Rowling's Harry Potter novels. Okay? And I stole this. I stole it from C.S. Lewis, good friend of Tolkien's, who, when the Lord of the Rings came out, Lewis wrote a review of it called The Dethronement of Power. Okay? I just changed one word. Changed dethronement to renunciation. The course examines the ways in which each author focuses on the uses and abuses of power, and ultimately, how each author suggests humility, restraint, and sacrifice, or the renunciation of power, as the means to resist and defeat arrogance, ambition, and the will to power. Now, I earlier kind of let out that I don't care for the films. Either of the films. That is, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. Why?
Because they completely... It's like, I don't know, I hate the Harry Potter films. And for me, it's like you take the book, and you say, okay, I'm going to draw a disc. I'm going to cut out my disc. That's what we're using for the movie. Just throw everything else out. I mean, there's no...
It's a good way of putting it.
You can't follow the movie if you just watch the movie.
That's a good way of putting it. The best, in my opinion, and I've not seen all of them, and of the ones I've seen, I've not seen all of them because I stop. But I think of the ones I've seen, the best one's the first one.
Yeah.
I was just, since Glenn Fry died, I was just downloading the greatest hits of the Eagles the other day, and it's kind of the greatest hits of Harry Potter 1, the first one. It includes all the greatest scenes. Okay? Not a lot of narrative to tie them together all that well. Okay? So why else? Well, let me use an ad hominem attack I love to use. Peter Jackson is an ass. What do I mean by that? His wife is an ass. They're two of the three screenwriters for The Lord of the Rings. Okay? Look at what I say in that section about course description. The course examines the ways in which each author focuses on the uses and abuses of power, and ultimately how each author suggests humility, restraint, and sacrifice as the means to resist and defeat arrogance, ambition, and the will to power. What does Peter Jackson focus on in The Lord of the Rings?
Always the battle scenes.
Battle scenes?
Love story.
Love story. Is there a love story in The Lord of the Rings? Whether you've seen the film or read the book. Well, not in the modern sense, not in a Twilight, sense or, tonsillectomy kind of sense.
I remember that if there was a lot of love from the screenwriter, there's a lot of love from, I guess, the screenwriter or whatever to the elves.
Oh.
Yeah, okay.
You say that it's a story of agape between Frodo and Sam.
Okay, yeah, that kind of love. But there is a love story in it of Aragorn and Arwen,
Yeah.
which is based upon a much older love story from the Silmarillion, the story of Beren and Luthien Tinuviel, which Tolkien wrote kind of as a description of his and his wife's relationship. If you go to Tolkien's grave today, I teach a course in London every other summer, and I did an Inklings course there once. If you go to Tolkien's grave today, you'll see J.R.R. Tolkien, Beren, Edith Pratt Tolkien, Luthien, which is probably the greatest story Tolkien has written. Okay? But what does Peter Jackson do with The Lord of the Rings? he turns it into entirely a story about swords and sorcery.
Same thing with the Hobbit.
Yeah, don't.
I wouldn't even watch them.
Saw the first one, about vomited during the first 5 minutes, and I would never even.
That's what I
go
do.
there. Okay. What do I mean? He turns it into a story or a film of swords and sorcery. Okay. The second film, The Two Towers. What takes up the most time in terms of episodes, if you think of it in that way, in The Two Towers, in the film?
Helm's Deep.
The Battle of Helm's Deep. It's like 45 minutes of the film. Film, if I remember right, is about 2.25 hours long. It's roughly a third. Okay? In the novel, in the second book, The Two Towers,
6 pages?
Battle of Helm's Deep is 5 pages long. It's 5 pages out of almost 400. You do the math. You figure out the ratio. Okay? So he kind of really emphasizes this battle, and it's not the battle that's described in the novel. It's this massive, CGI fest. Okay? Why? Because he can do it. He has the technology. He has the tools. We can make bazillions of orcs and stuff, okay, and make them look good and make each one individual. I don't short his company's CGI abilities. And I don't necessarily short even his directorial vision. I short his understanding of Tolkien. He doesn't understand Tolkien at all. He thinks the novel is Dungeons and Dragons. And it's not. Okay? It's not even close. Similarly, the Harry Potter films. I saw number 6. I was teaching my Harry Potter course in London, and got tickets for my family to go see number 6, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. Thank you. At the IMAX, downtown London. Okay, I fell asleep in the first 5 minutes. To me, it was that bad. It could not keep my attention, and I, dozed off periodically during the rest of it. I have not seen number 7 and number 8, and I will not see number 7 and number 8 because of what I know they omit at the beginning of number 7 and the end of number 8. And what they omit entirely changes the story. Harry Potter is not a story about revenge. See, that's one of the things, one of the elements that drives my terminology, wacko Christians, utterly crazy. It's all about revenge. It's all about this kid wanting to kill his enemy who killed his parents. No, it's not. If you'd read the damn books, you'd know that. What is it ultimately about? The opposite of revenge. Another word that also begins with re.
Redemption.
Bingo. Because we see Harry offer his arch enemy the possibility of redemption. And it gets cut from the film. It gets omitted from the film. Okay? We see that same kind of thing in The Lord of the Rings. Who's the hero of The Lord of the Rings?
Gollum.
Thank you. It's not Frodo. Frodo is an utter and abject failure. Completely. Okay? Tolkien says Sam is the hero. Okay. Gollum achieves the quest. Okay? Frodo doesn't. But Frodo does say something about Gollum at the end that kind of brings out what Tolkien is getting at. And he says, we should forgive Gollum, Sam, for I could not have achieved the quest without him. And guess what? When he says that, that ties back to something that Gandalf says in the 2nd chapter, which we'll talk about probably much longer than you want me to hear, than want to hear me talk about it. Okay? So those are just a couple of reasons. I mean, believe me, I could go off into more and more what Peter Jackson does with Faramir. He ought to be shot, hung, drawn and quartered, decapitated, burned at the stake, all, simultaneously. Because he takes a character that is heroic and noble and chops his legs out from under him. He makes him into a 20th, 21st century, if you want, existential, dirty, rotten scoundrel who merely wants power. Faramir in the novel doesn't want power at all. He is never, it's his defining characteristic. He's never tempted by the ring. In the film, he's entirely tempted by the ring. Why? Because he wants to suck up to daddy. Okay? So we're going to be talking about all that as the semester goes on. Disclaimer. Syllabus is subject to revision. I don't mean, I'm going to drop Lord of the Rings and add something else. I mean, we might get behind. And if we do, we'll just have to, adjust dates, for exams and things like that a little bit. If I make any revisions, it'll be done in class. Okay? Or if I make any changes to assignments, that'll be done in class. Your responsibility to keep track of all that. Check your MTSU email daily before class. I mean, just get online and just check to see if there's a message from me in case for some reason I've got to cancel class. Okay? If I do, what do I say? Yeah. I say I'll post something to your MTSU email by 4 o'clock. Okay? And to the D2L announcements page. So just double check those to make sure we're on for the evening. I don't foresee any problems, but I'm kind of starting to wonder with the weather pattern they're talking about starting tomorrow. This might be one of those semesters where we get nailed every week. It's happened several times. What else? Students with disabilities, you know who you are. Get me the appropriate paperwork by next Tuesday night. Okay. Class attendance. Attendance is required, expected. We only meet one night a week, folks. You miss something, you're going to miss out on a lot. Try to be here on time. Do your best. If you know you're going to miss class, let me know ahead of time. Okay? Usually, if you let me know ahead of time, I won't count that against you. Unless you say, I'm planning on going and getting drunk in the afternoon, so I'm going to sleep off through your class. That won't, I've actually had people do that before. That won't work. Papers are due at the beginning of class on the assigned days, unless otherwise directed. Late papers will be penalized. If you know you can't turn in your paper on time, let me know ahead of time. If you come to me the day it's due and say, I can't turn my paper in because I don't have it, I'll say, first of all, duh, that makes a lot of sense. And then I'll say, that's too bad. Sorry, can't do anything to help you there. But if you've got a paper due next week and you're just having a really hard time with it or something and you need an extension, I might give it to you, but I won't give you an extension on the day the paper is due. That just won't happen. Okay? Similarly, with the attendance, I knew I had a screw up in this. That paragraph at the bottom of the first page where it says 3 absences will result in 1 letter, that's for my other class. I have no idea how that got past me. You get 1 absence. Second absence is failure. Okay, again, because we only meet 14 times, I think it is. Okay? Maybe 15 times. If you've got to miss class, let me know ahead of time. Similarly, don't have a semester that goes by that multiple students have family emergencies or personal emergencies. My second year here, I had a student come into my office after class one day, just broke down in tears. She'd just gotten a diagnosis of ovarian cancer, and it was her 20th birthday. And I was like, okay, how do I handle this? And I just said, we can, in terms of the class, we can work with this. But I actually said, this is the least of your worries. You need to work with the rest of your life, kind of get that in order, and not even worry about this. You already have an incomplete if you want the incomplete. You want to withdraw, you get to withdraw, okay? If you have an emergency come up, let me know immediately. It doesn't mean you're taking your husband, wife, child, boyfriend, girlfriend to the hospital and you're texting me at the same time. Get there first, okay? But within a day or two of whatever the emergency is, let me know. I will bend over backwards, move heaven and hell if I can to help you, to make it possible that you can complete the course. Again, if I can. But if you just disappear in 2 weeks and then show up again the week before finals, as happened with a student I had last fall, and say, what do I need to do to pass the class? I'll say nothing, because there's no way you can pass the class at that point. Okay? So, emergency happens, contact me immediately, and we'll work something out. I mean, I've done that a lot. Don't use your cell phones. If you take a call in class, I'm going to kick your ass out of here for good. I mean, there's zero tolerance kind of thing there. Okay. One little caveat to that. If you have a family emergency, an ongoing thing, okay, if you have currently right now a family member who is ill, and I don't mean they've got a temperature of 99. I mean, you got somebody with cancer or something. I keep bringing up cancer. My wife was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago. But something like that, by all means, bring your phone to class, have it out, have it on vibrate, talk to me, and it rings, I'll know why you're leaving. Okay? No questions asked. Just anything like that, you're out of here. Okay? What else? Failure to complete any assignment other than possible daily quizzes. I throw in the possible daily quizzes. I have not had possible daily quizzes in this class for probably, or the other class, the precursor to this class in probably 10 years. But failure to turn in an assignment is an F. You've got the grading scale, which is pretty easy to help you figure out what your current grade is or what your end of the semester grade is. You have whatever number of points you earn divided by the total number of points possible. We've got 2 exams and a paper, 100 points each, 300 points total. Whatever you earn divided by that 300, that's what you get. Okay? Assignment reading schedule. These are the days by which you're supposed to have those things read. Obviously, I don't expect you to have Fellowship of the Ring read for tonight. I do expect you to have it read, finished, by next Tuesday. Okay. That's why I said, one night a week, we cover a lot of ground. Okay? And we might even start 2 towers next week. Okay? So we're going to try to cover some of Fellowship of the Ring tonight. What we don't cover tonight, we'll finish definitely next week. And then, about a day total for 2 towers, and then Return of the King, a day or day and a half. Exam will get distributed on February 9th. It's a take-home. It's an essay. We'll talk about that more later. And then it'll be due the following week. Okay? We'll spend one night on Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or the stupid American edition title, Sorcerer's Stone. We'll spend one night on Chamber of Secrets. We'll spend one night on Prisoner of Azkaban. Why? Well, because the first novel's fluff, and it introduces us to the world, the story, because it's written for 10 and 11-year-olds. Each successive novel, however, is not written for 10 and 11-year-olds. The intended audience grows along with the main character. Then we have spring break, and then we come back and we have about a day and a half, maybe 2 days total for Goblet of Fire. And then 2 to 2.5 days, hopefully, For Order of the Phoenix, which is too long. We'll talk about why. A day and a half for Half-Blood Prince. Yeah, we might need to take some time for Order of the Phoenix to do Half-Blood Prince. And then 2 full days for Deathly Hallows, which will not be enough time. Okay. I could probably spend an hour and a half just on the chapter of King's Cross. I could probably spend an hour and a half just on Snape's memories in that novel. Okay. In fact, I have in the past, easily. Okay. Term paper is due Tuesday, April 19th, a couple of weeks before the end of the semester, or the end of final exam period or whatever. Final exam will be distributed the last day of class. It's not during the exam period. And then will be due the following, it's either Monday or Tuesday, by noon or 10 a.m. No, I say by 10 a.m. In my office. Okay? Important dates there, that's withdrawal dates and stuff like that, in case you decide you don't want to continue. Exams. Okay? You're going to write 1 take-home exam on the Tolkien material, The Lord of the Rings, and 1 take-home exam on the Harry Potter material. Okay? That's the final exam. That final exam has nothing to do with Lord of the Rings. It's just rolling. Okay? And then I give you specific directions or specific kind of comments about the Lord of the Rings exam and the Harry Potter exam. At the time of the exams, you will get another sheet that has very clear, specific directions. For the Tolkien exam, you must have 5 direct quotations, not paraphrases or summaries, but direct quotations. Notice, bold, all caps, from the Lord of the Rings. So how many quotations do you have to have from Lord of the Rings for the Tolkien exam? 5. Want to take any bets? Want to put any money down as to how many of you, if any, will have 4 or 3? You can have more than 5. 5 is the minimum. I mean, you don't want 50. This is a pretty short paper. It's roughly 3 full pages. Okay? But it's minimum 5. Pretty clear. Everybody hears me, right? Okay? For the rolling exam, you must have direct quotations, not paraphrases or summaries, but direct quotations from at least 5 different Harry Potter novels. Notice the distinction. The first one is 5 quotes from Lord of the Rings. The second one is a quote from 5 separate, different Harry Potter novels. I don't care which ones. You choose the 5. Okay? It doesn't mean 4 Harry Potter novels and a book about Harry Potter, or 4 Harry Potter novels and an article about Harry Potter. It means 5 Harry Potter novels. Okay? Pretty clear, right? You think there's any wiggle room here? Any fudging? There's not. There's not at all. You turn in an exam with 4 quotations from the Lord of the Rings, it's an automatic F. I won't even read it. You turn in an exam with quotations from 4 Harry Potter novels, it's an automatic F. Okay? Let me give you an idea of how I grade the papers. I get them all nice and together first. Well, hold on, let me skip on it a second. Go down to the end of that next paragraph, where I talk about MLA guidelines and documentation, all that kind of stuff. Look at the sentences in bold print. Failure to include a title for your paper, failure to turn in your paper at the assigned date time, and or failure to follow any of these directions. That is the foregoing directions, or the directions that will appear in the handouts I give you, because the same statement will be on that, will result in an automatic F on that paper. Don't test me on this. What do I mean by don't test me on this? Don't do it. Okay? Here's what I do when I grade papers. I get them all together, and the first thing I do is I just start flipping through looking for titles. If a paper doesn't have a title, I set it aside and I give it one. It's F. I don't look at it after to that point. All I do is I check the name and I put 55 in the grade book. You get 55 points for an F. You could get 0, but a 0 sinks you. It's pretty hard to dig out of that hole. It's not as hard to dig out of a 55, okay? So, whoever makes that cut, hopefully it'll be everybody, I then go to the second thing I do in grading papers. I turn to the works cited page. If it's the Tolkien exam, what should be on the works cited page? Lord of the Rings. Not a book about the Lord of the Rings. Okay? Not some damn website. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. Publisher's info. Okay? It's all that needs to be there. Yeah.
In the publisher's info, do we, like, they'll be sufficed with telling what book we're reading from in the page numbers?
No, you don't have to put the page numbers there.
Okay.
Okay, that's...
Well, not in there, but like, will the publication tell enough about which book we're reading?
Yeah, I mean, it should look like this. Assuming you're using the one volume, for example. Tolkien, J.R.R. There's a space between the initials, by the way. The Lord of the Rings. This is the 50th anniversary edition. The one I ordered. It's New York. I want to say it's Houghton, but for some reason, yeah, it is Houghton. Something always shows up as Mariner. Houghton, comma, 1994. How do I know it's 1994? Because it was first published in 1954. It's the 50th, it'd be 40th. No, sorry, 2004. 2004. 50th anniversary edition, okay? If you're using that one, that's all you need. If you're using individual volumes, then you're going to have J.R.R. Tolkien, and you're going to have The Fellowship of the Ring. You might have, you can do this, you don't have to, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. It's just a lot longer, but it's the same thing. And then you have the place, the publisher, the date. Okay? And that's going to be Tolkien, J.R.R. 3 dashes, period, that's indicating same author, then you're going to have the next one. The Return of the King. Or it might be The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Place, publisher, date. 3 dashes, period, The Two Towers. Place, publisher, date. That would be it for the Lord of the Rings exam. For the Harry Potter exam, how many sources do you need to have?
5.
You need to have 5. So, guess what I do? I go through your works cited page, and I count 5 Harry Potter sources. It gets put on the good pile. I count 4, and it's like, you know, the goats in Jesus' parable of the Last Judgment. It goes off into hell. It gets an F. Okay? I have 3, it gets an F. Really, I don't know why people do this, but some people, I think they just try to test me every semester. Okay? And I'll get, 5 quotes from one Harry Potter novel. Okay? Why do you get an F for that? Because you're stupid. That's why. And you shouldn't be at college. That's the honest answer. Not many professors will tell you that. But that's the honest answer. If you can't follow simple, very simple, basic directions like this, you shouldn't be here at all. Because you're wasting your time and money, and you're wasting my time. You're not wasting my money. I still get paid no matter what. Okay? So, once you make that cut, going through the works cited page. I then go through the paper and look for direct quotations. If it's the Lord of the Rings exam, I just find a quotation. I go 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, give me a fifth one. And if it's not there, F. Okay? If it is there, it goes in the good pile, and I go to the next paper. If it's the Harry Potter exam, I don't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I count by title. You use Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. That's number 1. You use Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, again, it doesn't count. All I need is one quotation from 5 separate novels. Yes.
But in that example, you can also have 7 quotations, 2 from the same book.
Sure.
That's 5 total.
Yeah.
Okay.
You gotta have minimum 5 different Harry Potter novels. Okay? You have more quotations than the minimum 5, but you have the 5 separate novels. You've got 2 quotations from Sorcerer's Stone and 3 from Half-Blood Prince and 4 from Deathly Hallows. That's fine. As long as you have the minimum 5.
Okay.
You make that cut, then I'm gonna read your paper. Okay? Your paper's gonna be, as I said, about 3 full pages, maybe 4, okay, at most. Most of my colleagues in the department would probably spend 10 to 15 minutes grading that. I'll spend 30 to 45 minutes. When you get your paper back, you'll know why you got the grade that you received. Whether it's a really good grade or a really bad grade. Even if it's a really good grade, your paper's gonna have a lot of marks on it. Okay? It's gonna have lots of comments. And one of the reasons I do that is because, frankly, I don't think we're being taught well enough in English 1020, because it seems, and it's gotten worse over the last 10 years, that many of the 1020 instructors are not, excuse me, not emphasizing or not paying any attention to things like grammar, okay, word choice, where there are better words maybe than the words you've chosen. I used to edit a scholarly journal that was largely devoted to the writings of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and George MacDonald and others of that kind of writing. And as an editor, you do a lot of revision, okay? When you get your papers back, you're going to see a lot of suggested revised comments. Not because you're going to revise that paper for a better grade, you're not. But because if you take that paper and then read those comments, maybe my hope is you'll kind of take them to heart, and then you'll use that as a template when you have your next paper, okay, for this class or for others. It's designed to help you become, a better writer. Yes?
Is there any early submission or a way we can meet with you in the office to revise before turning it in?
Not for the exams.
Okay.
Okay, for the exams you can't. For the longer term paper, yeah, if you want me to take a look at it, I'll take a look at it ahead of time.
Okay.
I won't proofread at all at that point. I won't revise or suggest revision. What I'll do is I'll tell you whether or not you are in the right direction. That is, yeah, this is a good beginning, keep it up, okay? Or if it's got problems, I'll say, this isn't gonna work, and kind of tell you why, okay? I encourage everybody, use the Writing Center. If you know, based upon your previous writing classes, if you know there are other areas where you have some writing issues, okay? First of all, own up to that. Accept that. And get stronger from that. Go to the Writing Center. Say, my professors have told me that I don't understand how to use commas. Explain to me what a comma splice is. Okay? I'll explain on the papers, because I'll circle every damn one of them. And I'll put a CS. Apostrophe errors, I'll mark every one. Okay? This is the nitpicky stuff that drives me crazy. My sister today wrote an obituary for my mom. My mom died earlier this month. My sister wrote this obituary, and she had the names of a couple of families, and she used apostrophe S for plural. And I'm like, Mel, damn idiot, you don't use apostrophes for plurals unless it's collective. The boys, dogs, okay? BOYS, apostrophe dogs kind of thing. But that's not what she was doing. Okay? What else? Term paper. Let's talk about that for a moment. Okay, you're going to write one 7 to 10 page term paper, excluding works cited, which is probably only going to be 1 page anyways, okay, on a topic of your choosing, right? You get to come up with the topic for this paper. But you got to get my approval. That's all I ask. Please, don't try and get my approval midnight before it's due the next evening, okay? In fact, I might actually put in you got to get my approval deadline. And if you don't hit the deadline for the approval, paper's going to get docked, because older I get, the more crotchety I'm getting. I'm just getting really tired of people emailing me, the midnight before a paper's due in the morning. I forgot about my... So, got to get my approval. 99% of the time you have it. I mean, there are very, very few instances where somebody says, Dr. Sherman, I want to write a paper, and I'm like, are you crazy? No, that's not going to happen. What, at the most I'll do is you'll talk to me after class or before class or in office hours or shoot me an email, and you'll say, Dr. Sherman, I want to write a paper about Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings. Well, first of all, duh, that's required, okay? So I'll say, what do you want to write about Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings? You don't have to give me a thesis, but you do have to give me a somewhat narrow topic, okay? And I've given you some possible topics. Turn to the last page of your syllabus. You don't have to go with one of these. Usually the students who don't go with one of these write the better papers, because they come up with it themselves and it's something that interests them. So, find something in these novels that interests you. Okay? So the ones, that I always throw out there. The course title, The Renunciation of Power and the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. The War on Terror. Yeah, we're going to talk about that a lot. Okay? In the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Terrorism in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. If you don't think there's terrorism in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, you don't know what terrorism is. Book 6 opens post 9/11. Okay? The virtues of mercy and pity in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Christianity in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Well, I've got Christianity in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Why don't I have atheism in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter? Or Islam in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter? Because they're not there. But there is an awful lot of Christianity in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, notwithstanding the Christian whack jobs who want to burn her at the stake. Okay? And I say that being a full-blooded Christian. I started a church in Murfreesboro. Okay? Sacrifice in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Humility in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter is fairy stories. The thing by Tolkien that I dropped out is on fairy stories. And I used to spend about 2 days talking about some of those elements. Self-denial in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Good and evil in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Death in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. It's an important theme. But there are no alien abductions in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Why? Because there are no alien abductions in the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Whatever topic you come up with has got to be something that can be soundly argued based upon those texts. Okay? So, look at the term paper. Notice what it requires. Direct quotations from at least 5 different Harry Potter novels. Okay? And 5 direct quotations from the Lord of the Rings. So how many titles minimum are going to be on your works cited page? 6. Okay? You may not be math majors, but you ought to be able to come up with that one. If you're using 3 separate Lord of the Rings, then you've got 8. Okay? This is a scholarly, formal academic research paper, as I said. The version of the syllabus that I uploaded to D2L tonight, I dropped the next sentence. Actually, I didn't drop it, I revised it. You may not use electronic or internet sources. Okay? You may not use internet sources. What do I mean by internet sources? Websites.
Articles about the book.
No. Project Muse, InfoTrack, all those research items that the library has access to that presents electronic versions of published materials. You can use those. What I don't want you using is Jimmy Joe's Guide to the Lord of the Rings. .com. Okay? And the reason I did this semester is I've had it. I've had it with the shit from the internet that people have been using as reliable sources. Stuff talking about hobbits aren't real. They're not. Hobbits aren't real. The Jedi aren't real. Some people disagree on that. Okay? So I have just, because of a few bad apples, I've just thrown the whole damn internet out in terms of possible sources. Are there good materials on the internet for Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter? Yes, there are. There is a lot of really, really good stuff. But you can find really, really good stuff via print ways also. Okay? Obviously, then, what does that mean? Who, major living writer, can you not use? J.K. Rowling. Pottermore? Nope. Don't use it. Okay? Don't use it. And here's why. She had her bite at the apple. She had her chance to say what she wanted and needed to say when she wrote the novels. What she's doing now, not necessarily with Pottermore, right? Not as much with Pottermore, as much as what she does sometimes when questions come in, and Muggle and stuff, is she comes in and she creates answers for problems in the novels. Okay? On scale, technique of writing. J.R. Tolkien's up here. J.K. Rowling's here. She doesn't come close. As a writer, as a practicer of the craft, okay? In terms of technical ability and brilliance, she's not a great writer. With one exception. Read her detective novels. Her Cormoran Strike novels. That's the name of the detective. She's fantastic. I think she can give any detective writer, Agatha Christie, etc., a run for their money. She is superb as a writer of detective fiction. Okay? What she is good at is storytelling. Man, I would love to sit around a campfire and listen to her tell a story. She would enthrall you. Tolkien, I don't think, would be able to do that because he's too much of a perfectionist. Okay? That's right. Tolkien needs every word he has here. Rowling doesn't. Well, Rowling needs more than anything is a good copy editor. Especially when you get to book 5. My God, that book just doesn't end when it should. It should end much, much sooner. It's like 860 or 870 pages in the American edition. You could lop off 200 pages and you wouldn't really miss much. Okay? But there's a reason why they didn't. There's a reason why she didn't. Beginning with the 4th book, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, what did you start to see with the releases? Anybody know?
They started coming further and further apart.
They got darker.
The book got darker.
They started having parties.
Yeah, they started having release parties. Midnight releases began with the 4th book. In fact, it's with the fourth book. She broke the record for book sales. Before people could even get the damn book in their hands. She sold more books than anybody else alive. And nobody had the book in their hands yet. Because of Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that Bloomsbury, her English publisher, and Arthur A. Levine and Scholastic, her American publishers, came to realize something about every word she wrote.
People would pay for it.
Coin. Money in the bank. I mean, she was the golden goose. So you get book 5, don't touch a word. Because book 5 outsold book 4. Book 6 outsold book 5. Book 7 outsold book 6. Okay? I think at last count, over 500 million copies of her 7 novels. She goes from being poor on Scottish welfare to 10 years later, less than 10 years later, being the wealthiest woman in the United Kingdom. Total net worth greater than Queen Elizabeth. Just wrap your mind around that for a moment. You thought Powerball was big. Okay? Poor. Poor. Not, I'm poor, but I've got a widescreen TV and 2 different phones and a computer and a car. And poor. Okay? To worth billions. All because an idea popped into her mind about a stupid 11-year-old kid who discovers on his birthday that the greatest dark wizard of the age is after him. Okay? So there's other comments there about the term paper. And then I have comments about paraphrasing. Why do I include comments about paraphrasing? Because every paraphrase needs to be properly introduced. When you're paraphrasing somebody else's words, what are you doing?
Using their ideas.
You're using their ideas. Okay? You're stealing their ideas if you don't do what? If you don't properly cite them. What does the properly cite them mean? It's not only the parenthetical citation at the end. It's what comes before the actual paraphrase. You've got to have that introduction, because if you don't, then your ideas just run on into your source's ideas. I'm not clairvoyant. I'm not a legilimens, to use a word from the Harry Potter novels. I don't read minds. I can't necessarily tell where your thoughts end and somebody else's begin. If I can't tell where your ideas and words end and theirs begin, you're guilty of plagiarism. Okay? That's why you show where paraphrase begins. Now, with the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter material, you won't have that problem because you're not paraphrasing. You're using direct quotations. But secondary sources for the term paper, you might want to paraphrase. Okay? And I give you a couple examples of how you could do that. You could do it, the very boring way. So-and-so writes. And then you say what so-and-so writes in your own words. And then you have a parenthetical citation at the end. It'd be boring, but it works. Okay? It's a lot better than the alternative. Okay, any questions? All right. Typically, just one second. Typically what I do in these night classes is I test your bladders. I just keep going. If you need to get up and leave, go ahead and get up and leave and come back. Okay, question.
So, I know I saw your comment on cell phone usage. As far as note-taking, is going to be mostly just highlighting through the book. But as far as external note-taking, what's your views on digital note-taking?
That's fine.
Okay.
If you want to record class, that's fine. I've got, I think, almost all my lectures from this kind of class up online on YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel with 100 or 200 different lectures. 1,000, 1,200 subscribers, something like that. I don't know that I'm going to record these or not. I'm recording tonight's because I'm going to say something in a minute that I wanted to get one recorded and two online. But I might record them. Okay. I started doing that because I thought it's a good way to have the material available for students who end up missing class for one reason or another, because you can just go to the YouTube channel and you can find the lecture that you've missed. Some of them, the lectures are missing. Okay, so I've, over the last couple of years, I've kind of gone through and tried to add things back in. But that way, if you do miss class, the material is available. There's a possibility, for example, that in 2 weeks, we won't have class. 2 weeks? February 2nd. Possibility we won't have class because I'm having knee surgery on the 28th. Should be fine by then, but if I'm not, then I'll direct your attention to a YouTube lecture, okay, for that material concluding the two towers. Other questions? Yes.
Laptops are okay?
Yeah. Yeah. I won't walk around and see if you're on Facebook or whatever. What I don't want to see, if you're using your cell phone to take notes, I guess that's one thing, but try not to text and stuff in class, please. Other questions? Okay. Hopefully, you didn't only take, I shouldn't say that because I know that's why you did. I was going to say, hopefully you didn't only take this class, to fulfill an English lower division requirement, but that is why you're here. Hopefully you want something more than that out of this class, okay?
I'm a psych major.
You're what?
I'm a psych major.
Oh, okay. And hopefully you're here, meaning MTSU, for more than just a stupid piece of paper. Okay. They won't tell you the truth in admissions or in COPE, so I will. Your stupid piece of paper is really worthless. I mean, a college degree today is equivalent to a high school diploma 20 years ago. It's not really much more. Okay? It doesn't open the door to jobs like it used to, because now very menial jobs now require a college diploma, which is utterly ridiculous. Okay? So hopefully you're here for more than that. Hopefully you're here to actually, let's use some crazy ideas like broadening your perspective, seeing things differently. Okay? And not just to get your own way of experiencing and viewing the world reinforced. What am I getting at? If you were at all aware last fall, you might be aware of some things that happened on university campuses across the country. Protests and such. I'm not against protesting. I'm against stupid protesting. What do I mean? Group of students at Princeton University. Not a bad school, right? It's frickin' Princeton. One of the most selective colleges in the country. Okay? But a group of students protested and occupied some university administrative offices until the president, just blows my mind, until the president agreed to their demands. Any of you know what their demands were? They wanted a building name changed. Kind of sounds like MTSU with Forest Hall, right? No, it's not a building named after a founder of the KKK, however.
Thank you.
Which we'll talk about that in a moment, too. It's a building named after a former professor at Princeton, who also was a former president of Princeton, and a former governor of New Jersey, and a former president of the United States. Wilson. Okay? Has a school of public policy named after him. So why did they want Wilson's name removed from this building? Any of you know? You need to keep more in touch with current affairs.
I don't know, but by how the story's going, I can tell it's really stupid.
He was a racist. Wilson was a racist. Everybody acknowledges that. Pro-Wilson supporters, anti-Wilson people. Everybody acknowledges he was an avowed racist. His father was an avowed racist. His father was a preacher from Virginia. Well, there it goes, part of the Old South. Okay? What do I mean when I say Wilson was a racist? Well, Teddy Roosevelt, who was president before Wilson, not immediately before, but before Wilson, one of the things Teddy Roosevelt did was he encouraged African American employment in the government. Okay? So, various African Americans rose to positions of prominence and power in various parts of the government. One of the things Wilson did when he became president is he got all those people out of their jobs. All of them. He demoted them or removed them. Pretty nasty piece of work. Okay? So, a bunch of students want his name removed from this building. Why? What will that do? Will it give all those dead African Americans their jobs back? No. Will it make life better today? No. Will it make life better today to take Nathan Bedford Forrest's name off of the building that his name is on? What building is that? It's not Peck Hall. His name isn't on a humanities building. It's not on a mathematics building. What building is it on?
ROTC.
The military.
Gee, and what would Nathan Bedford Forrest have to do with the military?
One of the greatest generals of all time.
The fact that he was a military genius, okay? Is his name there because he was an avowed racist in his earlier life? Notice how I emphasized that earlier. Okay? No, it's not. Let me go back to something else in mind, and then I'm going to come back to this. What kind of stories are these that we're reading?
Fiction?
Fiction, okay? Are they science fiction?
No.
No.
Fantasy.
They're fantasy. What kind of story is Star Wars?
Sci-fi.
Science fiction?
Space opera.
Fantasy?
Science fiction.
It's fantasy. It is thoroughly fantasy. It's not science fiction. What kind of story, notice how I'm using that term broadly, is Star Trek?
Sci-fi.
That's science fiction.
Okay.
Or Space 2001: A Space Odyssey is science fiction. What's the difference between science fiction and fantasy? What is emphasized in science fiction?
Science.
It's the first part.
Physics.
Science, technology. Okay? Isn't there technology emphasized in Star Wars? The first one, A New Hope, Episode 6.
I think it's
Think about it.
I think it's less about the technology and more about the magic force powers.
Okay. If you're on whose side? You remember that scene where Darth Vader and one general, who's soon to be a dead general, are talking on the bridge? And the guy's talking about the destructive power of the Death Star. And what does Darth Vader say?
The ability to destroy a planet is nothing compared to the power of the dark side.
Yeah.
I probably botched that line, but whatever.
It's nothing compared to the power of the Force, he says. Not even the dark side, just the Force in general. What does Han Solo think about the Force in that movie? Hokey religion and old weapons, are no match for a good blaster. They're no match for an Uzi. What does he mean? Give me my well-oiled, proper handgun. You could take your silly little sword and go off and play somewhere. Okay? But what does he learn? How many of you have seen Star Wars Force Awakens? It's all true, Han says. Everything, the Jedi, the Force, all of it. He has a what?
Revelation.
Revelation, change of heart. Do we see anybody else in the Star Wars mythology have a change of heart?
Darth Vader?
Anakin.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Same,
a
same, I know it's the same.
It's a
Yeah.
cyclical story.
Same person.
Yeah.
No, that one.
The cycle of change of heart is the story of Star Wars.
Okay. You remember the third film, Revenge of the Jedi? It's about the only good part in it, I think. When Luke is with Darth Vader, he turns himself in, and they're on the bridge of that one ship, or on that one deck or hallway or whatever, and he says, "There is still good in you, Father. I can feel it." What does Darth Vader say? He doesn't say, "You're wrong."
It's too late for me, my
He
son.
says, "It's too late for me." Is it?
No.
Because what does he do by the end of the film?
He saves Luke.
He saves Luke. It's not too late for him. Okay? Because of some technological know-how? No. Big Lord of the Rings. Who achieves the quest?
God.
Gollum. Gollum. Frodo says to Sam, we should forgive him, because if it weren't for him, the quest never would have been achieved. Okay? But in the chapter, The Shadow of the Past, when Gandalf starts to talk to Frodo about Gollum, Frodo can only think of one thing. He wants to kill him. He wants Gollum dead. Okay? And we're going to spend a long time on this passage when we get to it. And Gandalf is going to say, I have not much hope that he can be cured. Excuse me. I have not much hope that he can be saved before the end. But there is some. Second chances. Towards the end of the novel, after Saruman leaves Orthanc, we see Gandalf and Frodo and Sam and others come upon Saruman a couple of times. In fact, earlier even when Gandalf goes to Orthanc to question Saruman, before Saruman is cast from the order, Gandalf offers him a second chance. He says, you can still be of use to us. You know, and if you prove yourself good, maybe you'll get the keys to Orthanc back. He offers him multiple times the opportunity to be good. And Saruman spits in his face. Almost literally, every time. Okay? Harry Potter. At the end of the novel, or the end of the 7th novel, Harry says something to Lord Voldemort that does not make its way into the film. He says, be a man, Voldemort. Try for some remorse. I've seen the real you. I've seen what you'll become. Try for some remorse. What does he mean?
Ask for forgiveness.
He doesn't mean necessarily ask for forgiveness.
Try to feel sorry for what you've done.
Show contrition. Feel sorry for what you've done. Because within the course of the novels, we're told that's the only way you can repair your soul. If your soul has been torn apart through murder, and Voldemort's has been shattered. What is Harry saying?
You can be whole again.
you can be whole again. You can be, let's use Tolkien's word, cured. Cured. Made whole. Made healthy. See, that's what these novels are dealing with. Right? They're not dealing with microaggressions or macro-aggressions. They're not dealing with little issues. And I'll tell you right now, there won't be any quote-unquote microaggressions in this class. If you're going to be offended by me, you're going to be majorly offended. I'll be really offensive. Okay? I'm going to challenge you to kind of step outside your comfort zone with what these authors are saying. They're going to challenge you to do that. Okay? This is the one place, this meaning the university, any university, every university, is the one place where every idea ought to be able to be discussed, no matter how repellent or abhorrent that idea is. You want to talk about racial superiority? This is where it should be discussed. You want to talk about racial inferiority? This is where it should be discussed. Why? Can you talk about that at City Hall? Can you talk about that in your job at Starbucks? No, you'll get fired. Okay? I know my son works at a local restaurant, and one of the other servers, this is just an example, I'm not going to name the restaurant. One of the other servers made some comment about being against same-sex marriage and was fired. Because the server made the comment publicly. Okay? The restaurant is a private enterprise. Owners can do what they want. You are not necessarily guaranteed guaranteed freedom of speech in your place of employment. Here, you damn well better be. Because if we don't have it here, we won't have it anywhere else. Okay? And with what we saw going across the country last semester, it was at this very place that people were trying to shut down freedom of speech, trying to shut down what can be discussed and what cannot be discussed. Okay? Questions? Comments? Because we're going to talk about some of these issues when we get into these books. Harry Potter, racism is an important issue within the novel. Prejudice is an important issue in the novel. Life and death are important issues in the novel. How you treat another person based upon how they look, where they're from, how they sound, how smart they are, how normal they are all important issues in those novels. So that means each one of those issues can and ought to be discussed. Each one of those issues can serve as a basis for a paper. Racism, prejudice, yeah, you have it in Harry Potter. Yeah, there are elements of it in the Lord of the Rings. Okay? What is the basis always for racism and prejudice? Is the person who is a racist or who's prejudicial, are they open-minded?
They're intolerant.
They're intolerant. Yeah, I don't like that word intolerant. Because intolerant gets used to shut people down. Okay? It gets used as a bludgeon. Again, this is the one venue where we can be intolerant. You don't have to tolerate other people's ideas.
Would ignorant be better?
Fearful.
No, ignorant just means not knowing.
It's usually taught, isn't it?
Racism is. Prejudice is.
Because, there's one idea somewhere, or a group of ideas, and then it gets passed on throughout the...
Yeah, or it's because you don't have an exposure to those people.
It should be fear.
It's all about socialization.
A lot of it's about socialization. I heard the word
Egocentric?
xenophobic. I don't like this part, but we'll talk about it. What does it mean?
Fear of change.
No. Fear of others. Fear of those not like me.
Okay.
Okay, 50% of the population is not like me. Does that make me xenophobic? No. Is Donald Trump xenophobic?
Yes.
Possibly.
No, he's not. This is what I'm getting at. He's not xenophobic. What does this part mean?
Fear.
Fear. Just because somebody doesn't like, let's be blunt, illegal immigrants, doesn't mean they fear them. This gets attached to far too many words.
Okay.
And what it means when it gets attached is, oh, so-and-so, not that they disagree, it's that they're fearful of. Okay? So are ISIS fighters Christophobic?
No.
Do they fear Christians?
No, they
No.
despise them.
They despise them. Okay? Are Jews Arabophobic? No. They don't fear them. There is a rational, intellectual disagreement. Among all Jews? No. Are some Jews racist? Yes. Why? Because in any group, there are going to be racist and prejudicial people. Okay? Are Christians who disagree with same-sex marriage homophobic? No. It's a moral issue. Okay? Are homosexuals who disagree with Christians? You never hear this turned the other way. That is, you never hear this kind of thing, about, I don't know, a baker in Portland, Oregon. Oh, she wouldn't bake a cake for a couple of gays who got married. That's because they fear Christians. That's all I have.
I have a question. How is it not phobic? I mean, in a way, is it not the fear of the dilution of the norm and what they're to bring? I mean, illegal immigrants, nobody wants them. Some people just don't want them here because they don't belong here, per se. And some people believe that they're going to take the jobs and
Okay,
don't care.
but even that, let's use that for an example. That's a reason. That's a thought process. They're going to take jobs. Is there a fear that I'm going to lose my job? Not necessarily. Okay? Does Donald Trump fear he's going to lose his whatever job he has? No, of course not. So that's a rationale. That is, there is a logical reason for that. It's not fear necessarily that they're going to overrun the country. Okay? Use a better example. Let's use a better example. Obama's Syrian refugee policy. Okay? Wants to bring in, depending upon your source, anywhere between 10,000 and 100,000 Syrian refugees. Are people who disagree with the policy Syrian refugee-ophobic? No. If they're anything, they're terrorophobic. They fear terrorism. Okay? With some reason, right? I mean, look what happened in San Bernardino. And the wife in that group got in how? Completely legally. Even vetted by the State Department, which is kind of what makes some people say, the vetting process is what needs some work on. For example, the Syrian refugee issue. And we'll do this kind of thing at various points throughout these novels, because we're going to see, Tolkien's going to talk in his foreword. He's going to talk about applicability, how you apply what you're reading. Okay? The Syrian refugee thing. Do you know how we get the Syrians who want to come over? Are Syrians just going down to their local, I want to immigrate to the United States office in Damascus, Syria, and saying, I am Aziz al-Ansar something, and I want to immigrate to America? No, they're not. Okay. First of all, they're largely refugees. They're displaced already by the Syrian civil war. Okay. So where do they go? They go to the UN refugee camps. Okay. Who runs the UN refugee camps? A bunch of Swedish UN officers? No. Local, on-the-ground people working for the UN. Okay. Local, on-the-ground people working for the UN are generally Syrian. What's the dominant religion in Syria? Islam. Okay. That's why of over, I think it is 1,300 Syrian refugees that were brought into the United States last year, only 38 were Christian. Well, why only 38? Because if you're a Syrian Christian, the last thing you're going to do is go to a UN refugee camp run by a bunch of Muslims and say, I want to leave, I and all my family. Because what do? They start taking names. Okay? This would be like a Jew going to the Foreign Service in Berlin in 1938 saying, I'd like to leave. The Germans didn't let them. Okay? So you have very few Christian Syrian refugees. And oddly enough, I don't mean to cast aspersions or anything, but of the Syrian terrorists that have been caught, very, very, very few have been Christian. Those that, for example, shot up Paris weren't. The one that blew up part of Istanbul just 2 days ago wasn't. Okay? So there are reasons why people take issue with the Syrian refugee policy. It's not because they fear them as individuals. It's they fear what? The possibility that terrorists will find their way through. Because we know what ISIS has publicly said. We're going to use your refugee process against you. Okay? And they have in other places. And possibly here. Okay? So, tie this back to what I was saying earlier about this being the one place where these kinds of issues can be discussed. If they're not discussed here, where will they be discussed? They won't. They won't. Okay? And if they're not discussed, then what happens?
Never changes.
It never changes. Okay? It never changes. And so when you have those groups who try to shut down debate on college campuses about a whole bunch of issues, I mean, my God. Specialists, world-renowned specialists in early childhood education at Yale, got raked over the coals shortly after Halloween because she sent an email to her students. She was one of the masters at Syllabus College. Yale has a residential college system where they have a master and co-master. This woman's name was something Christakis. Can't remember her first name. Her husband's name is Nicholas Christakis, and he's the master of Syllabus College. You know, the university said, oh, it's Halloween. Let's try to be tolerant and understanding of people, and let's not try to wear offensive Halloween costumes because we don't want to offend anybody. And she sent an email to her students and essentially said, you know, or maybe we should try to be adults and not take offense where none is intended. And you would have thought somebody said Jesus was the Antichrist. I mean, huge uproar. I mean, huge. And her husband issued a little, thing saying, she was only trying to get people to think from a different perspective and analyze blah, 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 blah. And there's a YouTube video. I mean, you can search for something like Nicholas Christakis being yelled at, and you'll see it. And this one woman, this 22-year-old student, I mean unloading on him. Both barrels. Every F word you can imagine. Just up one side, down about how he should be fired because he defended his wife. And Yale took 28 days, the administration took 28 days to come out and defend her freedom of speech. She since decided, the hell with it. I'm not teaching classes in the spring. Neither is he. They weren't supposed to be on sabbatical. And they're probably going to be leaving, I imagine. I mean, why put up with that nonsense? Okay? If you can't discuss these ideas, then we're in a lot of trouble. In 1951, Ray Bradbury published a little novel called Fahrenheit 451. The subtitle is The Temperature at Which Books Burn. And the whole novel is about censorship. And Bradbury, I think, was a genius. Because Bradbury shows in there censorship doesn't begin from the top down. The way people tend to think. It doesn't begin with the government telling us what we can or cannot read, what we can or cannot think. It begins with little aggrieved groups of people. And he goes into great detail about these little aggrieved groups of people. He names them all. And he gives all kinds of hyphenated names. He's writing this in 1950. He publishes it in 1951. Long before we saw any of this. Okay? But he actually mentions, he says, you know, the blacks don't like Little Black Sambo, get rid of them. Little Black Sambo used to be a popular story. You can't see it anymore. Try to watch Walt Disney's Song of the South. It'll never be re-released. Never. Okay? Because it's racist. Okay? And he goes on, and then Bradbury discovered about 40 years after he wrote that, his own novel was being censored by one of the editors at the publisher that bought the publishing rights. Didn't buy the copyright, bought the publishing rights. They went through and took out all the dams. And he was like, damn you, this is what I'm writing about. You don't like my book. You're going to see this. We're going to talk about this in just a moment with Tolkien. You don't like my book, write your own. Okay? Christians, many, didn't care for J.K. Rowling's novels when they came out. They thought she was literally trying to lead them to Satan, to lead children to Satan, to lead children into the occult. Why? Because the first title in America had the word sorcerer. Anybody know why the American version is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and not Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone?
Philosopher's too big a word for us.
Or they wouldn't
Close.
really know much about philosophy and of Nicholas Flamel and alchemy.
Not really.
We wouldn't have put two and two together.
No. It's because the American editor, Arthur A. Levine, said American parents aren't going to buy a book for their children with the word philosophy in the title. That's it. Why is that a problem? There's never been any such thing as a sorcerer's stone. Never, ever, anywhere in the world. There has been a thing such as the philosopher's stone. That is, people have been seeking this thing for over 3,000 years. They've been trying to create it because of the power it will give you. So then you take the philosopher's stone and change it to the sorcerer's stone, you completely take out all of this intellectual history that lies behind it. And instead, what have you created? The stone that is related to sorcery. And the Bible says, in the Old Testament, sorcery is no good. kill sorcerers, you know. Doesn't quite say it exactly like that, but I'm kind of playing Donald Trump here, channeling how he understands Scripture. So, what does that mean then? Well, there are witches and wizards. Old Testament law says, have nothing to do with witches. Burn necromancers. Burn them. Don't talk to them. Don't read them. Okay? So they said, there are witches in this book. Can't read it. And yet many of those same Christians loved C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. There's magic in there. They don't have an issue with the Lord of the Rings. Hello, major character, Gandalf, wizard! So what's the difference? Well, everybody knows Tolkien's a Christian. He's a Catholic. Everybody knows C.S. Lewis is a Christian. He wrote the book on Christianity for mid-20th century Christians called Mere Christianity. But J.K. Rowling, single, unwed mother on welfare. 3 strikes, you're out. Okay? She wasn't unwed when she got pregnant. Her husband dumped her. She divorced him. Bet he wishes he'd been a little brighter about that. Okay? But J.K. Rowling gave an interview in about 2002 with the Vancouver Sun, I think it was. This is after people are calling for her hide. Burning her books, literally. I mean, you had book burning parties, more so in the South than other parts of the United States. Okay? Book burning parties. And the interviewer got around asking her, are you a Christian? And she said, yes. I think the interviewer probably about had a heart attack at that point. What do you mean? I'm a Christian. Well, what flavor? What branch of Christianity? She said, I attend the Church of Scotland, Presbyterian. Not known as a bunch of pansies. Okay? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, what does that mean for your novels? That is, how does your Christianity inform what you're writing? And she says, well, I can't really answer that, because if I answered that, it would kind of give away the ending. Okay, this is 6 years before the final novel is published. What does that mean? If I were to talk about how Christianity informs the novels, it would give away the ending. Doesn't that kind of say that Christianity somehow is important to the ending? And yet when the 7th book came out, a famous literary critic writes for Time magazine, he's a novelist himself, a guy by the name of Lev Grossman, writes an article titled, I don't have the exact title, it's something like J.K. Rowling Kills God in the 7th book. And he does an interview with her. And he says, you killed God. And she's like, excuse me? He's nowhere to be found in the Deathly Hallows. And she says, he's not as absent as you think he is. And she doesn't really say any more than that. And I think with good reason, because Lev Grossman must be an intellectual moron to not see the Christian elements. Okay? This is fantasy. What does that mean? It's not just because it's fantasy, because it's set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Why do authors choose fantasy as their medium? Why did Tolkien choose fantasy? This is one of the things I would have addressed if we talked about the fairy story essay. Because you can address real world issues in another setting, and people won't see that they are the same issues they're dealing with here in that other setting until they get to the end and they'll go, my God, I get it. I understand what he's doing. But Tolkien says he doesn't have any inner meaning or message. In his Foreword. He says, as for any inner meaning or message, it has in the intention of the author none. That is, he didn't set out to write a quote-unquote Christian story. But he does say in one of his letters that The Lord of the Rings is fundamentally a Catholic and philosophical work. But then he adds one statement onto that. More so in the revising than in the creating. So what does he mean by that? He means he can't help himself. Why? Because he is fundamentally Catholic and philosophical. That is, he thinks about life. He thinks about things. And you can't divorce an author from his or her work. And this is where I think J.K. Rowling makes a little mistake. She thinks, apparently, she still has the final say on what Harry Potter means. She doesn't. Why? Because she already wrote it. It's already out there. Doesn't mean it's divorced from her. It means its relation to her is her as author at the time she wrote it, in the place that she wrote it, in the time period in which she wrote it. So it's influenced by what? Late 20th century Great Britain culture, values, questions, issues, problems. Do you think there are social class problems in Great Britain in the 1980s and 90s? Yeah. Are there problems of judging people by their dialect? Oh yeah. Are there problems of judging people by their economic status? Yes. Are there problems of judging people by how they appear? Yep. Are there problems of judging people by the kind of family they come from? Oh yeah. Similarly with Tolkien. Tolkien says, towards the end of the foreword, one has indeed personally to come under the shadow of war to feel fully its oppression. Any vets in here? Okay. I had last summer a guy who turned out to be a very good buddy of a friend of mine at my church. A friend of mine at my church was in the battle for Fallujah. This guy was also in the battle for Fallujah. And I mentioned that, and he comes up to me and he starts, interrogating me, trying to find out who this guy is. And I mentioned, and he's like, oh yeah, blah, blah. Okay. They saw things no one should have to see. I had a guy, 15 years ago, who was in the first Gulf War. Special Forces. One of those who was dropped in Iraq, actually with Saudi Special Forces. And he's like, Dr. Sherman, we shouldn't use that term to describe these Saudi guys. I mean, they're supposedly, quote unquote, behind enemy lines. There could be enemy combatants nearby, and these guys are literally walking around with flashlights on in the desert where light can be seen long, long way, and talking at the top of their lungs. And he's like, I wanted to kill myself. Didn't, but he wanted to. And this was, he was like a bear. This guy was massive, okay? Tolkien goes on. But as the years go by, it seems now often forgotten that to be caught in youth by 1914 was no less hideous an experience than to be involved in 1939 and the following years. In other words, to be an 18-year-old in 1914 in Great Britain was really no difference than to be 18 in 1939 in Great Britain. You were going to fight for your country. But then he gives us the kicker. By 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. Now think about that. Tolkien was born in 1892. So he has 26. Think of all your close friends and remove all but one. How does that impact your life? And not because they disappear. They're dead from war. Tolkien saw stuff in World War I nobody should have to see. In fact, he gives us descriptions in a couple of his battles that we know from other World War I veterans are based upon what Tolkien saw. The passage of the Dead Marshes. When Gollum leads Frodo and Sam through the Dead Marshes and they see faces in pools of water. That's because in the trench warfare of France of 1918, we have multiple accounts by survivors of guys crawling from one trench to the next, coming across decapitated heads staring up at them from pools of water. Okay? That's an image Tolkien can't shake. So he's not writing to glorify war. He's writing to kind of say, war is the very last alternative. Which we're going to hear Gandalf essentially say. And Tolkien's actually going to say, and there are some battles wars can't win. Because who do you have to kill in order to win? Everyone. Some battles can only be fought where? Here. There is still good in you, Father. It's too late for me. Is it ever too late? I mean, think about that for a moment, seriously. Is it ever too late? Should we ever write anybody off? Who does anybody include? Pick your crazy wacko killer. Jeffrey Dahmer. You know who Jeffrey Dahmer is? Minnesota, takeout, so to speak. Ted Bundy. Charles Manson. Zodiac killer. I grew up near Santa Cruz, California in the 1960s. I would go to bed at night, literally scared to death that the Zodiac killer, who was operating less than 30 miles away from me, would sneak into my room at night. Okay? Turns out I didn't need to worry about the Zodiac killer because there was another mass murderer who moved on my street when I was about 11, 12 years old. A guy by the name of Leonard Lake. Google him. He invited my sister and me into his house one Halloween. His house was painted black, by the way. And he followed us for about a quarter of a mile. I was 12 or 13. It was only after I moved away from home that this guy gets arrested. And we find out, one, he's a Vietnam vet. Not all Vietnam vets were bad. Most of them were fine. But he went a little off. And then they find in this large plot of land he owns in the Central Valley, I think it was something like 18 or 20 bodies buried. Okay?
He just said it.
Too late? Is even he unredeemable? Beyond the bounds? Saddam Hussein? I almost said Obi-Wan Kenobi. Osama bin Laden? Depending on your political perspectives, George Bush, because a lot of people equate him with the others. I once had a student, I was teaching a writing class, and we'll get to Lord of the Rings after this. I was teaching a writing class. I mean, this is early in my tenure. It must have been like 94, 95. Student wrote a paper about what he called, three of the greatest, it's like sociopaths or something. Three of the worst leaders of history. And it was Hitler, Stalin, and Lincoln. He is from Virginia. He loved the Old South. I mean, I'd make comments about the KKK, and I mean, this guy would be looking at me like, I've got your number, buddy. I mean, so again, depending upon your politics, you can include whoever you want there. One of the things you'll see in these, I hope, is this idea that maybe we need to stop writing people off and start giving them a chance. Okay? Now, if you have your book with you, just a couple more comments about the foreword. 8 o'clock. Tolkien tells us how he came to write this. And he says he started writing The Lord of the Rings shortly after he finished The Hobbit, but before The Hobbit was published in 1937. Okay? Have any of you read The Hobbit? Have any of you seen any of the abomination, desecrations?
Saw the first one, and I walked out, and I didn't see the other ones.
I saw bits and pieces.
Yeah.
I just had to see Benedict Cumberbatch as
Smaug.
Smaug. I didn't watch the rest of the movie though. Only after watching that
They
scene.
wanted a sequel to The Lord of the Rings, and
Yeah.
they wanted more battles, and so, I mean, like, I refused to watch the second and the third, because, like, the Battle of Five Armies and, like, these characters that they've added into, like Legolas is in The Hobbit, and he's not supposed to be in...
And Arwen, and yeah.
And, right, well, I don't even know, because I just...
They're not. Yeah,
refuse
yeah,
to see
they're not there. Again, and that's Peter Jackson and Philippa Boyens and the other screenwriter whose name I can never remember, thinking they're better writers than Tolkien. And they're also thinking what?
money.
Lord of the Rings made $1 bazillion. And they thought they're going to make $1 bazillion. Didn't quite turn out that way. The third film of The Hobbit, if I remember right, I think they lost money because of how much they spent on it. And because it was panned so much. So, Tolkien says he started The Lord of the Rings before the publication of The Hobbit, but then he stopped and he wanted to go back to the older material, the material that later gets published by his son as the Silmarillion, the mythology that underlies all of Middle-earth. Okay? The gods, the creation of the world, all that kind of stuff. And he says he sought out the opinion of those whose advice and counsel he respected, and they said, give it up, nobody's going to be interested in this. So he went back to The Lord of the Rings. And when he goes back to The Lord of the Rings, it's right about the time of the outbreak of World War II in 1939. So he works on it for several years. Okay? And he gets to the end, this is on Roman numeral 23, the paragraph that begins, it was during 1944. He gets to the end of that, and he has another paragraph. And he says, The Lord of the Rings has been read by many people since it finally appeared in print. 1954 and 55 is when it appears in print. He's writing this foreword for the 1965 second edition. He makes corrections and changes between 1954, 55, and 1965. Okay? So he tells us why he wrote this. He says, here's the motive and intent. Motive? The desire of a tale teller to try his hand at a really long story. Did he succeed or fail? Okay, it's really long. Yeah, I mean, pick up the book. Okay? A really long story that would hold the attention of readers. Yeah, and obviously, because over 250 million copies have been sold. Okay? Amuse them, yes. Delight them, yes. And at times maybe excite them or deeply move them. There are people who have read The Lord of the Rings every year since it was published. In fact, Syllabus in the films had read it every year. He was friends with Tolkien. He actually tried to get Peter Jackson to change some of what they did in the film. And he wouldn't, the arrogant little New Zealander. Like with what he did to the character of Faramir. Christopher Lee almost walked off the set about that. He should have. Okay? So, Tolkien says, as for what might amuse, delight, etc. people, he only had his own feelings as a guide. What does he mean? I wrote the kind of story I liked to read. Tolkien was a scholar of Anglo-Saxon literature. He was probably one of the greatest scholars of the Old English epic poem Beowulf. I teach Old English at the graduate level, where I teach the students how to read Old English, and then the second semester we translate all of Beowulf. 3,182 lines. We translate it from Old English into modern English. Okay? So Tolkien's talking about the kind of stuff that he liked. And he says, some people who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it, have found it boring, absurd, or contemptible. Notice the little dig he gets in there. Some people who have read the book or have reviewed it at any rate. What does he mean? That there are some people who reviewed the book but didn't read it. Happens all the time. You get paid to do a review, you read beginning, middle, and end, but not all the parts. You just get a general gist of what's going on, and then you rate that. But Tolkien says, but that's okay. I have no cause to complain, that is, that they found it boring, absurd, or contemptible. Why? Since I have similar opinions of their works. Tolkien did not like modern 20th century literature. Tolkien didn't like pretty much any literature written after about 1400. Shakespeare's too modern. He doesn't like Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. I adore Shakespeare. I revere Beowulf, but I adore, Shakespeare. He says that I have similar opinions of their works or of the kinds of writing that they evidently prefer. Edmund O. Wilson, important 20th century critic, wrote a review called, "Ooh, those awful orcs." Okay? You could kind of have an idea of what he doesn't like about it. One of Tolkien's friends in the group called the Inklings, C.S. Lewis, Owen Barfield, Charles Williams, a few others, they would meet together twice a week, read to each other stuff they were working on. Okay? Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, stuff for the Silmarillion. Charles Williams read portions of his novels he was working on. C.S. Lewis read portions of Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra and Screwtape Letters and things like that. One of the other members, a guy named Hugo Dyson, is recounted as saying at one point Tolkien comes in and he starts reading, forgive my language here, and he goes, "Not more fucking orcs." Okay, and this is a group of Christians. Okay? And he's like, "Please, Tollers, give them a break." Okay? Because it's, 1,200 pages of orcs and dwarves and elves and balrogs and hobbits and all these other things that aren't real. Okay? That was what Edmund O. Wilson's main problem was. None of this is real. Stick to realistic literature, naturalistic literature. Deal with the real problems of the world. Which is exactly what Tolkien is doing in an otherworld setting. So anyways, he goes on and says, as for any inner meaning or message, it has in the intention of the author none. He didn't set out to deliver a moral. This isn't Aesop. It's not C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia, where, as Lewis said, in reference to another series of books he wrote, the Space Trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet, Perelandra, and That Hideous Strength, Lewis came to realize, to quote him, that he could smuggle theology through romance. By romance, he really meant fantasy. Okay? Because people read and reviewed his book, Perelandra, who didn't have a clue what it was about. Perelandra is Lewis's rewriting of Paradise Lost, telling the story of humanity's fall from Eden. The only difference is it's set on Venus, and the Venetians don't fall. They stay pure. And Lewis kind of does it in a way to show how humanity fell. Okay? So, Tolkien says, I didn't have any inner meaning or message. I'm not trying to sit down and write, this is how you renounce power. Right? Does that mean there isn't any inner meaning?
No.
No. When you read that essay by George MacDonald that I'm going to send out, The Fantastic Imagination, what MacDonald does there is he imagines a interlocutor asking him questions, and he's answering them. And he's talking about why write fantasy. And one of the questions the interlocutor is going to ask is, but what if I get more out of what you wrote than what you intended? MacDonald says, good. You should get more than what I intended. Why?
Because you interpret it in your mind.
Okay. You interpret it in your own way. Is that always good? What did I say you can't write about? Alien abduction in The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Why?
This is not there.
Because it's not there. There's nothing within the words on those pages that support that. Okay? So the interpretation has got to be based upon what is actually there. Okay? So what else? What do each one of you individually bring to this book that I don't?
Our own personal experience.
Your own personal experience. Your own background. The two of you that were in the military, I never served in the military. Okay? I don't have that experience. I do not have that background. That is something I will never be able to, get a grip on, so to speak. Okay? I have my own experience. Every time I read this, I started reading it, I think when I was 16 or 17, for about the first 10 years after I first read it. I read it at least once a year. Sometimes 2 or 3 times a year. I would read it to the end and I would start over again because I didn't want it to end. I was that nerdy. Okay? But now when I read it, I don't read it like I did when I was 17. Why?
Different experiences.
I'm not the same person I was. Now when I read it from the perspective of a 54-year-old English professor who has read some of the works that influenced Tolkien. And I've read them in the original languages. I've read Beowulf in the original. I've read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in Middle English. Okay? I've read some of the Norse sagas in Old Norse. And that informs my understanding. Okay? I'm not Catholic. Tolkien was. I'm Orthodox, like Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox, which is kind of close, but not quite the same. Okay? But if you're not either of those, if you're not Christian, you're not going to see some things that are there. Okay? But maybe you'll see other things. Okay? Those of you who have served in the military will probably see little things that the rest of us won't see. I imagine if I were English and I grew up in the Midlands of England, there's an awful lot more I would see. But even though I'm not English and I didn't grow up in the Midlands of England, I've been to England multiple times. And I've traveled in the Midlands of England and I've seen the Shire. The Shire is not in New Zealand. The Shire is in the countryside surrounding Oxford, where you see these little mounds and hills, okay, that are reminiscent of the descriptions of Hobbiton, where Frodo and Bilbo's house is built into the side of a hill. This isn't a hill like the hill you drive over to get to Franklin. It's not like that. It's like a swollen lump on a plain. Okay? Yeah, and there are plenty of burial mounds. You go to the Downs of Surrey, okay, and you are walking on the Barrow Downs. You go to Stonehenge. I teach a course every other summer, just about every other summer, in London called The Appeal of Harry Potter. It's a 4-week long course. Doing it next summer. If you're interested, see me, because it's almost full. If it's not by now. Probably is by now. And one of the things you can do as a member of the entire group is take a field trip to Stonehenge. Stonehenge is totally cool. It's not like I once had an American idiot describe at the National Gallery in London. It's just a pile of rocks. It's not just a pile of rocks, okay? But you go to Stonehenge, walk the path around, look at the stones, see if you can see the faces that are in some of the stones, that I'm convinced are in some of the stones, and then turn your back to Stonehenge and walk the path again and look at what's not at Stonehenge. And what you'll see on almost every degree of the compass is a burial mound. There are something like over 250 burial mounds within a, I don't know what it is, 4 or 5 mile radius from Stonehenge. And the thing is, they're discovering new things every year about Stonehenge. Okay? All that is in Tolkien's mind as he's describing this territory. Okay? So, he says, as the story grew, it put down branches into the past. What past? It's not real. The imagined past of Middle Earth. The imagined past. How many of you remember your first, if you ever saw it, your first experience of seeing the first Star Wars? Episode 6, A New Hope. I saw it in 1977, in May, when it came out. Okay? What's the first thing you see after the words trail off the screen? First thing.
Just the stars.
Big old Star Destroyer comes in from the top. And what do you see? Or let me put it this way. How many of you ever saw Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey? Anybody? Only 1 or 2 of you. What's the difference between the spaceships in 2001 and in Star Wars? Or even between Star Wars and Star Trek? The Enterprise. Okay. Not necessarily bigger than the Enterprise. I think they are. Yeah, they're shaped different. What else? What's the difference between going to a new car dealer and a used car dealer? The used car's been around the block, right? It's got dings, might have a little rust. When that Star Destroyer comes over, what can you see on it?
Pristine.
No,
Locks.
it's got blast marks. It's dirty. It's been around the block, so to speak. In other words, what Lucas is doing, not only with the words a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, telling us this is old, but we see not everything is pristine. In Kubrick's 2001: Space Odyssey, it's like everything just came off the assembly line. It's brand spanking new. You know, Star Trek, the last one. What does the captain say before Sulu takes it out, or whoever takes it out? He says, you have the parking brake off, don't scratch it. Why? Because it's brand new. It's not like that way in Star Wars. Star Wars begins, what? In medias res. Means in the middle of things. There's a history that's gone before. Okay? Tolkien does the same thing with The Lord of the Rings. We don't start with the creation of the ring. If you've seen the film, how does it begin? With Kate Blanchett's narration. Galadriel's. And we see images. The fight against Sauron getting his finger cut off, etc. Okay? So, Tolkien goes on. So he says it put down roots into the past. The crucial chapter, The Shadow of the Past, is one of the oldest parts of the tale, written long before the foreshadow of 1939 had yet become a threat of inevitable disaster. There are, I would argue, two crucial chapters. Okay? The first one is chapter 2 of book 1, and the second one is chapter 2 of book 2. Each individual volume has 2 books. Fellowship of the Ring is books 1 and 2. The Two Towers is books 3 and 4. The Return of the King is books 5 and 6. The two most important chapters are book 1, chapter 2, book 2, chapter 2, the Council of Elrond. Because it's in those 2 chapters where Tolkien gives us all the necessary exposition. We get all the background that we really need to make sense of what's going on. It's also where Tolkien dredges up the history. And that makes his readers go, more. Okay? He then talks about the difference between the war in The Lord of the Rings. He originally wanted this title, by the way, The War of the Ring, not The Lord of the Rings. In the real war. He says the real war does not resemble the legendary war in its process or its conclusion. Because a lot of people wanted to say, oh, this is simply allegory. This is simply, Sauron equals Hitler and also the Soviets. And the ring is obviously nuclear weapons, the atomic bomb. And the forces of the western part of Middle Earth are the Allies. You have men and elves and dwarves and hobbits. And we have the English, the French, the Americans, and everybody else, the good ones. If it, that is the real war, had inspired or directed the development of a legend, then certainly the ring would have been seized and used against Sauron. He would not have been annihilated, but enslaved. Barad-dûr would not have been destroyed, but occupied. What did we do with all the German scientists who developed their rocket systems? They helped us land on the moon. Werner von Braun, the head rocket propulsion scientist for Nazi Germany, enabled Neil Armstrong to say, that's one small leap for man, one giant step for mankind. Or one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Without Werner von Braun, we never would have gotten there. At least not within the 9 years, essentially, that JFK gave us as a time frame. What else? Saruman, failing to get possession of the ring, would in the confusion and treacheries of the time have found in Mordor the missing links. What do we see happen? United States detonates the first 2 atomic bombs in 1945, and Russia in about 1947. That is, Russia creates its own rings. And then what do you have? Ring warfare from that point on. So Tolkien says, no, let's not do that. He says, I dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. So what does he mean by allegory? What's an allegory? Give me an example. Name one. How many of you have read the Chronicles of Narnia? We're seeing the films. Who's the lion? Don't say Liam Neeson.
Aslan.
Aslan. Okay. Who is Aslan? Christ. He's Jesus in lion form. Almost. Lewis says it's not allegory. Lewis calls it a supposal. Let's suppose what happened on Earth happened in another world where people weren't dominant, but animals were dominant. What would it look like? Not quite the same as an allegory. Here's a better example of an allegory. The greatest allegory in the English language is a book written in the 17th century called Pilgrim's Progress by a guy named John Bunyan. And in this book, this guy named Christian has got to find his way to the celestial city. Who do you think Christian stands for? Atheist? No. Buddhist? No.
Christians.
And only Christians. Always, every time, without fail. Okay? And Christian has these problems as he goes on along. He's got to be wary of the slough, that means like pit, of despondency. Pit of despair. Any Princess Bride fans in here? Okay? That's what he's talking about. Okay? He's got to worry about people like vice and bad man. Right? As he weaves his way onto the celestial city, which is not Jerusalem, it's heaven. It's the new Jerusalem. Okay? You can never read Pilgrim's Progress and say Christian stands for Muslim. It doesn't work. Why? Because the author there is God. That is, the author fully determines the meaning. You can't play with it. You can't mix it around a little bit. You can't transgress it, in other words. Okay? So, Tolkien says, I much prefer history, true or feigned. That is, real history or pretend history, imaginary history. With its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. What does that mean? We get a say in what it means. We get a say in what the Lord of the Rings means. It doesn't mean simply the words on the page. If the words on the page have no reader, then what do the words on the page mean? Nothing. Nothing. We've got, we've got a bunch of artifacts that survived from 5, 6, 7, 8, 10,000 years ago. But we don't know what they mean because we have no way to decipher the script that they're written in. We think they mean something. We actually think some of these things are written in a form of writing that predates any known writing. Akkadian is pretty much the oldest form of writing we know about. But we've got these other things. It's pretty clear they're a form of writing, but we have no idea what they say. If somebody figures it out and cracks it, that'll take our understanding of human intellectual history back a couple more thousand years. Tolkien. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory. But the one, applicability, resides in the freedom of the reader. That is, how you read and apply it to history. Whether real, imagined, or whether your own personal history of what's happening now. The one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the purposed domination of the author. That is, where the author puts blinders on you and says, listen, you idiot, this can only mean one thing. Tolkien says, I don't like that. I doubt that anybody else in here does either. Why? We don't like being told what to think. This is why I went off on that whole spiel about, people trying to shut down thought and speech on college campuses. So, That's when Tolkien says, you know, an author cannot remain wholly unaffected by his experience. But the ways in which a story germ uses the soil of experience are extremely complex. What does he mean? He's getting up to the point where he talks about by 1918, all but one of his best friends were dead. And what he's getting at is, I am a product of my experience. I write from that experience. That experience informs what I write. It doesn't mean I necessarily understand it all. Because an author is just like each person in here. You know, we might be 10% conscious and 90% unconscious. Or the other phrase, subconscious. How many of us are really in tune with how our subconscious works? You know, you let out those little Freudian slips. That's the subconscious going, let me free, let me free. Tolkien is saying, I can't say how all my life experience comes out in the work. That's what I think J.K. Rowling is trying to do. She's trying to account for flaws in her writing. But it's not fair. It's not fair to us. That's not showing us as readers respect. What she ought to do, frankly, she ought to rewrite the novels. I don't mean rewrite, completely change them. I mean revise them. It wouldn't be a lot of work. And you know what? There are people damn stupid enough like me who would go out and buy an entire new set. And I've already probably got 5 complete sets of Harry Potter novels. Okay?
You have the new decorative set that just came out that you get in leather hardback.
No, I don't go that far.
That are colored according to the house of your choice.
No.
It's like 20-something special editions of Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have the illustrated Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. That's not bad. Okay? But if she were to go through and just correct errors, that's not the same thing. Okay? That's not coming out and saying, oh, blah, blah, blah. Because every author has a right to revise. Okay? But when she's trying to do it outside the world of the books, that's like trying to play God. Okay? Last thing Tolkien says there is he talks about the chapter, The Scouring of the Shire. He says, some people think that the Scouring of the Shire reflects the situation in England at the end of the war. He says it doesn't. The Scouring of the Shire was thought of at the outset. It's not included in the film. Why
It's
not?
shown as a possibility,
Okay,
but it's not like, it doesn't say this actually happens.
so why does Tolkien say it was thought of from the beginning? Why is it pivotal? What happens in the Scouring of the Shire? What do the hobbits discover when they go home?
Saruman has come and taken away everything that they knew.
Okay,
That everything has changed.
can you ever go home? I mean, think about it. This is actually a pretty deep question. No. Because what is always happening? When you go home, say you come to MTSU, but you don't live in Murfreesboro. Say you live in Charlottesville, West Virginia or something, and you're coming here for a specific reason. When you go home, you're not the same person that left. That's what Gandalf tries to get across to Merry, Sam, Pippin, and Frodo. You're not the same 4 hobbits that left here a little over a year ago. You've changed. Has the Shire changed? Yes. Bad things have happened to the Shire, but that's not as important as how they have changed. How and why have they changed? their experiences changed them. At the opening of the novel, we're going to hear Frodo say, we'll come back to a long expected party in a minute, or part of it in a minute. We're going to hear Frodo say in the chapter, The Shadow of the Past. I'm just using this for an example. I'm going to come back to earlier part. We're going to hear Frodo say, it's page 59. What a pity Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had a chance. Talking about Gollum. And Gandalf's going to say, pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy. Not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo, be sure. Because, be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. I'm sorry, said Frodo, but I am frightened. I do not feel any pity for Gollum. You have not seen him. No, and I do not want to. I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all these horrible deeds? Now at any rate he is as bad as an orc and just an enemy. He deserves death. Okay? So what's Frodo's attitude at the beginning of the novel? Kill the dirty SOB. What does he say? He is just an enemy. What does that word just mean? Only. Always. Ever. In Frodo's eyes, Gollum can be nothing else. And because he's only an enemy, he exists only to be in opposition to me, he deserves to die. And we get to the end of the novel, and we hear Frodo say, let us forgive him, Sam. And we hear Frodo not wanting to kill anybody. Even when Saruman tries to kill Frodo, Frodo says, no, Sam, no. He was once of a kind beyond our approach. He says, we have no right to kill him. And he says, I have not much hope that he will find his cure, but perhaps he may. After everything Saruman has done, Frodo is hopeful of what?
Redemption.
That even Saruman can be redeemed. Okay? Why? What brings about the change? Does he meet Jesus on his trip? No. Nor does he meet Elbereth Gilthoniel, nor does he meet Manwë or Varda or any of the gods. Okay? So what happens?
The growth of maturity within himself throughout the journey.
Okay?
And he's not secluded in Hobbiton anymore, therefore he's seen more of the world
Okay.
and experience.
And you could go all Joseph Campbell and says, oh, he took the hero's journey. And do all that. Okay? What has he seen?
He's seen death and despair and loneliness and temptation.
What does Frodo, at this point in the novel, know of death?
Nothing.
Zip. He doesn't know squat. And here he is, ready to kill him.
Spoiled.
He's kind of spoiled. Fat, dumb, and happy is the way I like to put it. Because he's literally fat, he is kind of dumb, and he's happy as a result of both of those. Okay? He doesn't really have any cares in the world. Other than that, okay, he's just been told, you have Satan's ring, and he wants it back. And Satan's looking for you. Okay? That's kind of pretty much who Sauron is. Okay? And now, he's angry. And what else? He tells us, I am frightened. You want to use the phobic word? He has Gollumophobia. He has Sauronophobia. Ringophobia. Everything-ophobia. He's scared, you know what-less. I am frightened and I do not feel any pity for Gollum. Because he's scared what's going to change? Everything. His nice little perfect world is going to go boom. Okay? And because of that, Gollum deserves to die. Because of what Gollum did. Gollum didn't really do anything personally to Frodo. He didn't actually really do anything personally to Bilbo. And that's why Gandalf says, Bilbo showed pity and mercy to Gollum. And that's why Gollum is alive. And you know what? And that's a good thing. Why? Because I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it. And he is bound up with the fate of the ring. Gollum gets killed here. Total failure. Yeah, there's no plot. Because when Frodo and the rubber meets the road, when Frodo says, I have come, but I will not do the deed I came to do. The ring is mine. Sauron would turn around, and like a big giant monster go and flick him into oblivion. He'd say, Junior, no, the ring is mine. Give it back. And then he'd torture him for 1,000 years. Okay? But because Frodo learns what? Pity and mercy. He changes. What's the difference, by the way, between pity and mercy? They're not the same. Pity is a feeling. Mercy is an action. Pity is feeling sorry for somebody. Maybe not somebody you have any control or power over. What's mercy?
Showing compassion to that person.
With one change. Mercy is showing compassion to someone under your power. I can't show mercy to somebody on death row. I can't. Why? I don't have the power. I can feel pity for them, okay? But I can't do anything to alleviate their situation. Let's say somebody wrongly imprisoned. There's nothing on God's green earth I can do. But I'm driving down the road tomorrow morning when it's going to be 22 degrees, or this morning when it was 14 degrees, and I see somebody out on the side of 24 on an on-ramp with a cardboard placard who's hungry, and I feel bad for them. That's pity. And I keep driving on. What am I not doing? I'm not showing mercy. Because if I have money in my wallet, which is usually a very big if, what has just happened? If I have money in my wallet, then that person is, to some extent, under my power. Because what can I do?
Do you give them money or give them food?
I can give them money. I can give them food. If I plan ahead, I can carry extra blankets in my car, or extra shoes, or extra socks. Okay? And I can change the trajectory, possibly, of that person's life by that act of mercy. Okay? We see Frodo show mercy to Gollum. We see Frodo show mercy to others. We see Gandalf show mercy to others. Sometimes the mercy is repaid, and sometimes the hand gets bit. So if your hand gets bit, I think Tolkien is asking, do you stop showing mercy? How many times before you, rather than pull out a 5, give them the finger? Ooh, see, told you. Going to be some pretty interesting questions and issues raised in here. Because once you start talking about pity and mercy, you're not talking about dwarves and fairies and elves and fantasy and unimportant stuff. You're talking about life here and how those values, how those virtues get lived out. Okay? Is it my responsibility or is it somebody else's responsibility? I'll leave you to answer that. Okay, we'll stop there. And we'll pick up just with the first chapter and go as far as we can next week. Hopefully we'll get through the Fellowship of the Ring. But not likely. Yes?
I feel that when you're saying that